I was 39 years old, married almost 18 years if you counted the dating, and I walked into my own kitchen one ordinary Saturday in April and did not know I was about to lose everything. That is the part one need you to understand before I tell you anything else. I did not see it coming. Not the way you see a storm coming. Not the way you see a bill coming. Not even the way you see your own bad habits coming back around. I just walked into my kitchen holding a Coke and a soda for my brother-in-law's wife, and by the time I walked out of that kitchen a year later, I was a different man wearing the same face, and there was a little boy somewhere in this town who might have been mine and might not, and I was never, ever going to know which. My name is Mark. I live in a small town in central Ohio, the kind of place where the same 6 families have run the same 6 businesses for 40 years, and everybody knows whose truck is parked where on a Tuesday night. I worked at a parts distributor on the edge of town, 8 to 5, half an hour for lunch. I usually ate in the cab of my pickup because the break room smelled like old coffee and somebody else's microwave fish. My wife, Rachel, was a dental hygienist 2 exits up the highway. We had 3 kids. Tyler was almost 18, already taller than me and already convinced I knew nothing. Hannah was 15, all eyeliner and slammed doors a year, but still my baby when nobody was watching. And then there was Caleb. Caleb was 11. Caleb was the kind of kid who still ran out to meet my truck in the driveway, like I had been gone a year instead of 9 hours. Caleb is the one I think about most when I think about all of this. Caleb is the one who makes the guilt sit on my chest at night like somebody's knee. We were not rich. We were not poor. We were the in-between people, the ones who get by on coupons and overtime, and a tax refund that always shows up just in time to fix whatever broke in February. The passion of the early years had cooled into something quieter between Rachel and me. But I told myself that was what 18 years was supposed to look like. You stop reaching for each other in the dark, and you start reaching for the remote. And you tell yourself that it's love to just a different kind, the kind that does not have to prove itself anymore. I believed that. I really did. I believed it right up until the afternoon a woman I had known for almost a decade bent over a patio table with a tray of crackers in her hands and looked at me a half second too long. And my whole quiet, ordinary, in-between life cracked right down the middle without making a single sound. Her name was Diana. She was my wife's brother's wife. She lived 4 houses down from me. And before I ever touched her, before I ever kissed her, before I ever did a single thing I can be punished for in a court of law or a court of God, I was already halfway gone, and I did not know it, and neither did anybody who loved me. I want to tell you this story the way it actually happened, not the way I rearranged in my head later, because later, after everything blew up inside my chest and stayed there, I went back through every single moment and tried to assign meaning to each one, and that is not fair to who I was at the time. At the time, I did not know. At the time, I just thought I was a tired man in a tired marriage, and the kitchen light was hitting her face funny. And I was reading something into a smile that was not there, but it was there. And by the time I understood that it was there, it was already too late to do the thing a good man would have done, which was to turn around and walk back out of the kitchen and never come back. I did not walk out. I stayed. I stayed, and I smiled back, and somewhere in the smallest part of me, in a room inside my chest I did not even know I had a key to, I opened a door. This is the story of what walked through it. And of the 4-year-old boy across my brother-in-law's backyard who is Diana's mouth and maybe my hairline, and of the question I am never, ever going to get to ask out loud. Start there. Let me tell you who I was before Diana, because you cannot understand what she did to me unless you understand how thin the walls of my life already were. I grew up 40 minutes in the house I live in now, in a trailer on a gravel road with a mother who worked 2 jobs and a father who worked none. My father was not a bad man, in the cartoon way. He did not hit us. He did not drink the rent money. He just sat. He sat in a brown recliner, in a brown living room, and watched other men do things on television. And he let my mother carry the weight of our whole lives on her back until one Tuesday when I was 16 years old. She set a bag of groceries down on the kitchen counter, pressed the heel of her hand against her sternum, said the word, "ow," very quietly, and died right there on the linoleum before the ice cream had a chance to soften. Heart attack. 44 years old. I was the one who found her. I was the one who called 911. I was the one who stood in the doorway of that trailer. and watched two paramedics try to bring her back on a floor she had mopped the night before. My father stayed in his recliner the whole time. He did not get up. He did not look over. He just kept watching his show with the volume turned up a little louder, because that was how he handled everything hard in his whole life, by turning the volume up on something else until he could not hear it anymore. I swore, standing in that doorway at 16, that I would never be that kind of man. I swore I would never be the kind of man who let his wife carry the whole world while he sat in a chair. I swore I would show up. I swore I would work. I swore I would be there. And for a long time that is the cruelest joke in this whole story. I actually was. I worked 2 jobs when Rachel was pregnant with Tyler. I built the crib myself with a borrowed drill and a lot of cussing. I was the one who got up in the night with the bottles so she could sleep through her morning shifts. I was the one who sat in the parking lot of the NICU for 9 days straight when Hannah came out too early and too blue, holding a paper cup of vending machine coffee and refusing to go home. I was the one. I was there. I built the whole thing with my own 2 hands. The marriage, the family, the little brick house on Oak Street with the loose gutter over the front porch that I kept meaning to fix. And then I sat down. That is the part one I've never been able to explain to anybody, because I have never told anybody, but I will tell you, somewhere between Caleb's 5th birthday and his 10th, I sat down, not in a recliner, not literally. I still went to work. I still mowed the yard. I still showed up at every school play and every parent-teacher conference and every little league game where Caleb struck out looking and came back to the dugout trying not to cry. On paper, I was still the husband and father I had promised that 16-year-old boy in the trailer doorway I was going to be. But inside, where nobody could see, I had started to sit. I had started to drift. I had started to feel the exact same quiet that had wrapped itself around my father's shoulders all those years ago in that brown living room. And the worst part, the part that scared me awake at 2 in the morning sometimes, was that the quiet felt good. It felt like a chair I was finally allowed to rest in. It felt like rest. And I was so tired. God, you did not understand how tired I was. Rachel did not know. Rachel did not know because Rachel had her own tired. The tired of a woman who had been scraping plaque off strangers' teeth for 19 years and coming home to make dinner for 5 people and fold laundry until midnight and then do it all again. Our tireds had stopped meeting in the middle. Our tireds had started passing each other in the hallway on the way to different rooms. We still loved each other. I want to be very clear about that, because I am going to be accused by you and by myself and by the God I am eventually going to have to stand in front of not loving my wife. And that is not true. I loved Rachel. I loved her the way you love a house you built with your own hands. I loved her the way you love the first car you ever paid off. I loved her the way you love the thing that is yours. What I had forgotten how to do was reach for her. I had forgotten that loving somebody and reaching for them are not the same verb. And by the time Diana walked into my kitchen with casserole dish, I had not reached for my wife in so long that my arms had forgotten the shape of her. That was the wound. That was a hole in me Diana slipped through. I want to be honest about it, because if I am not honest about it, I will make her into a villain she was not. And she was not. She was a woman with her own wound, and her wound found mine in the dark like 2 animals recognizing each other by smell. And after that, nothing either of us believed about ourselves was going to save us. Here is how it actually started. Not the look, not the hug. The beginning, the real beginning, was a week in April when Rachel's brother Joel and his wife Diana signed a lease on a little brick rental 4 houses down from ours. I have to tell you about Joel for a minute, because Joel is the man I betrayed. And if you're going to hate me for what I did, I want you to at least hate me for what I did to the right person. Joel was 3 years younger than Rachel. Easygoing the way some men are easygoing, because nothing has ever really been asked of them. He worked construction. He drank a little too much on the weekends. He told the same 3 jokes at every cookout, and you laugh at them every time. Not because they were funny, but because Joel was telling them. And Joel telling you a joke was like Joel handing you a beer. It was a thing you had to give, and you took it and you said thank you. He loved Diana, the loud way certain men love their wives in public, with a hand on her hip and a kiss on her temple and a steady stream of "ain't she something?" He called her baby in front of everybody. He called her baby in front of me. He was the kind of husband I had used to be and had forgotten how to be. And the truth is that on the day they moved in, I was already a little jealous of him without knowing it. Not of Diana, of his ease, of the way his hand still knew where his wife's hip was. They moved in on a Saturday in early April. It was still cold enough that morning that you could see your breath, and Joel had rented one of those little U-Haul trailers. And when I looked out my kitchen window and saw him try back that trailer into their driveway with one hand on the wheel and a cigarette in the other, I grabbed my work gloves off the hook by the door and yelled for Caleb to put his shoes on. That is the detail I wanted to hold on to. I brought my son. I brought my 11-year-old son with me the first time I ever walked up to Diana's front porch. Caleb held my hand halfway down the sidewalk and then let go when he saw his cousins in the yard. And he ran for them the way kids run when they have been promised something. And I stood on the curb for a second and watched him go. And I thought, this is good. This is what we needed. We needed people. We spent 2 hours sweating and swearing and laughing about a sleeper sofa that did not want to go through a doorway. At one point, Joel got the thing wedged sideways in the frame and started banging on the back of it with his fist, yelling, "You get in there, you son of a..." And Caleb looked up at me with his eyes as wide as quarters, and I clapped a hand over his ear and tried not to laugh. And Diana came out of the house just then with cold cans of Coke for everybody, for Ken's balance against her chest, her hair falling out of the ponytail she had pulled up into at 6 a.m. She handed Joel his. She handed Caleb his and ruffled his hair and told him he had gotten tall. And then she turned to me and held out the last can, and my fingers closed around the cold of it, and our fingers touched, and it was nothing. It was a soda. It was less than nothing. I want to be very clear about that, because later I would go back to that moment in my head 1,000 times trying to find the place where the whole thing began. And the honest-to-God truth is that on that cold Saturday morning in April, with my son 5 feet away and my brother-in-law cussing at a sofa, there was nothing there yet. Whatever came next was not waiting in that can. It was not waiting in her eyes. We were 2 tired adults and a cold drink, and that was all. But I will tell you what else was in that moment, because I did not see it until much later. When her fingers touched mine, she looked up, and I looked up, and for a split second, not a romantic second, not a dangerous second, just a regular human second, we saw each other. We saw each other the way 2 tired people see each other in a crowd. 2 people who are both carrying something heavy and have both been hoping, quietly for years, that somebody else would ask what it was. I did not know what she was carrying. I did not know yet that her father had walked out on her when she was 9, and that she had spent her whole adult life choosing men she thought would not walk out, and then quietly being disappointed when they turned out to be the same kind of half there. I did not know that Joel, who loved her loud in public, did not always know how to love her quiet in private. I did not know that she had been sitting in her own brown living room inside her own chest for a while now, listening to her own husband turn up the volume on a show she did not want to watch. I did not know any of that yet. I just knew she looked at me for a second like she was seeing me, and nobody had looked at me like they were seeing me in a long, long time. She took her Coke back into the house. Joel and I got the sofa through the doorway on the 3rd try. Caleb tackled one of his cousins in the grass and came up with a bloody elbow and a grin that took up his whole face. I walked home with him an hour later, his good hand in mine, his bloody elbow held out away from his body like it was a treasure he was going to show his mother, and I did not think about Diana again for the rest of the day. I want you to know that. The first time I met her as my neighbor, she did not even make it into my thoughts on the walk home. That is how small the beginning was. That is how innocent it was. That is how sure I am that I did not do this on purpose. The following Saturday, they threw a little housewarming. Nothing fancy. Joel grilled too much chicken. Diana made a potato salad that she apologized for the whole afternoon, even though it was the best thing on the table. Rachel and I went, of course. The kids tore around the backyard with their cousins until the mosquitoes came out. And after the food, after the paper plates had been balled up and shoved into a trash bag and Caleb had fallen asleep on the couch in the living room with his head in Hannah's lap, the 4 of us, the 2 couples, ended up around Joel and Diana's kitchen table with a deck of cards. It was nothing. Nickels and dimes. The kind of game where the stakes exist only to give your hand something to do while you talk. Joel dealt. Rachel complained about her cards. Diana poured 4 glasses of wine from a bottle Rachel had brought over, and when she set mine down in front of me, her wrist brushed the back of my hand for half a second, and I looked up, and she was already looking at me. That is the moment the whole rest of my life turned on. Not the hug on the front porch months later. Not the kiss under the oak tree. Not the motel. That moment, a brush of her wrist across the back of a hand in a kitchen 4 houses down from mine, and a look I was not supposed to understand, and understood anyway. Her husband was sitting 3 feet away from her, shuffling a deck of cards. My wife was sitting 3 feet away from me, complaining about her hand. And Diana looked at me across a paper tablecloth from Walmart, and she held the look. And then she smiled, and the smile stayed about a half-second longer than it should have, and I felt something warm drop into my chest like a coin into a cup, and I looked back down at my cards too fast, and I felt my ears get hot, and that was the very first time, I told myself the lie I was going to tell myself every single day for the next year. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself I was 40 years old and pathetic, and reading romance into a tired woman's tired smile. I told myself to grow up, to focus on my cards, to refill my wife's wine, to be a man. And I did all those things. I played out the hand. I lost on purpose. I refilled Rachel's glass. I laughed at one of Joel's 3 jokes like it was the first time I had ever heard it. I was, on the outside, exactly the husband I had always been. But on the inside, in that small secret room in my chest that I had not opened in years, a door had just come unlatched. Not opened, just unlatched. And I could feel the draft coming out of it the whole rest of the night. And all the way home on the sidewalk with Rachel's hand in mine, and up the stairs to our bedroom, and into the dark as I lay on my back next to my sleeping wife and stared at the ceiling and tried to name the feeling in my chest and could not. And here's the first big problem. The one I want you to carry with you into everything that comes next, because it is a problem that made everything else possible. The problem was not Diana. Diana was just a woman who smiled half a second too long at a card table. The problem was not even the smile. The problem was that when I lay down in the dark that night next to the woman I had built 18 years of my life with, the mother of my 3 children, the woman who had packed my lunch that very morning in a brown paper bag with my name written on it and marker the way she had done every workday for a decade, I rolled onto my side, away from her, and I closed my eyes, and I thought about Diana's wrist instead. Just for a second, just once, just the back of a hand, and half a smile in somebody else's kitchen. And I did not feel guilty. That was the first crack. Not the affair, not the kiss, not the motel. The moment I turned my back on my sleeping wife in our own bed and thought about another woman's wrist and felt nothing in my chest except a small, warm, secret yes. That was the night the whole rest of the story became inevitable, and I did not even know it. And I fell asleep easier than I'd fallen asleep in months. And when I woke up the next morning, the door in my chest was not unlatched anymore. It was open about an inch, and something cold was coming through it. The door in my chest did not fly open. I want you to understand that, because every story you've ever heard about a man like me makes it sound like one big decision, one dark night of the soul, one Hollywood moment where the husband looks at the other woman and something snaps. That is not how it works. That is never how it works. A good man does not fall off a cliff. A good man walks down a staircase, one step at a time, in his own house, with the lights on, and every single step he tells himself he can still turn around. The first step was the Friday after the housewarming. Joel called me at work on a Thursday afternoon and said, "Hey man, you and Rachel want to come over tomorrow night. We'll do cards again. Diana is making that chicken thing. You know the one." I said yes before I even thought about it. I said yes the way you say yes to somebody handing you a beer. And then I hung up the phone and I sat in my little glass office on the mezzanine of the warehouse, and I stared at a purchase order for brake pads, and I felt my pulse in my neck, and I understood, in the part of me I had been refusing to listen to, that I had just said yes to something that was not cards. I did not cancel. That was the first step. The second step was what I did before I went over there. I took a shower after work. I took a shower I did not need because I had taken one that morning. I stood under the water longer than I had to, and I scrubbed the back of my neck with a soap Rachel had bought for me at Christmas that I never used because it smelled like a woman's idea of what a man should smell like. And when I got out of the shower, I put on a shirt I had not worn in 2 years, a blue button-down Rachel had given me for our anniversary, the one she always said brought out my eyes. Rachel was in the kitchen, when I came downstairs. She looked up from the bowl of potato salad she was mixing, and she smiled a small, surprised smile, and she said, "Well, look at you." And she walked over, and she straightened my collar with both hands the way she used to when we were first married. And she stood up on her toes and kissed me on the mouth, a real kiss, the first real kiss I had gotten from her in maybe 6 months. And she said, "What's the occasion, handsome?" And I looked down at my wife, the mother of my children, who was looking up at me like she had just remembered she married me. And I lied to her face for the first time. Not a big lie, a small one. I said, "No occasion, just felt like it." And I kissed her forehead, and I took the potato salad out of her hands, and I walked out the front door ahead of her so she would not see my face. That was the second step, lying about the shirt. The third step was at the card table. I want to walk you through this one carefully because it is a step where I started to be somebody I did not recognize. We were at Joel's house. Joel was dealing. Rachel was on my left. Diana was directly across from me. And from the second I sat down, I could feel her not looking at me. That is the part nobody warns you about. A woman who is trying not to look at you is louder than a woman who is. A woman who is not looking at you is a radio station you cannot turn off. She was looking at her cards. She was looking at her wine. She was looking at the salt shaker. She was looking at everything in that kitchen except me. And every place her eyes went, I could feel them go. And every place her eyes did not go, I could feel that too. And by the third hand of cards, I was so aware of her, I could barely remember how many queens were in a deck. And then she slipped, just once. Halfway through a hand, Joel said something dumb about his boss, and Rachel laughed. And without thinking about it, without deciding to, Diana looked up at me across the table to see if I was laughing too. Just a flick of her eyes. A half second. The kind of look a wife gives a husband when somebody tells a joke. To share it. And I was not her husband. Her husband was sitting right next to her. And she had looked at me first. She caught herself. Her whole face changed. A little color came up under her jawline, and she dropped her eyes to her cards so fast you could hear her breath catch. And I felt that warm coin drop into my chest again, heavier this time. And underneath the coin, I felt something else I had not felt yet. I felt a question. The question was, who was she supposed to look at? Because the look she gave me was not flirty. The look she gave me was habitual. The look she gave me was the look of a woman who, at least for the space of a joke, thought I was her person. And if she thought that for a half second at a card table, what did she think the rest of the time? I did not sleep that night. I lay next to Rachel, and I stared at the ceiling, and I tried to talk myself out of what I already knew, which was that a door in somebody else's chest had come unlatched too. I had not been imagining it. I had not been reading romance into nothing. There was something there. It was small and it was quiet, and it had not said a single word out loud, but it was there in both of us, and it had been there since the kind of Coke on moving day, and the card table had just proved it. Here is what I should have done. I should have told Rachel the next morning, over coffee, in the most boring voice I could find, that I thought maybe we should not do the Friday card thing every week. I should have made up some reason. I should have said I was tired. I was working too much. I needed a Friday to myself. I should have built a wall out of any excuse I could find, and I should have built it fast, while the wall was still a small wall, while it only had to keep out a look. That is what a man who was still in charge of his own life would have done. I did not do it. I did the opposite. I went into work that Monday morning, and I told my boss I want to pick up the Saturday overtime shift again. I had not worked a Saturday in 2 years. And when he asked me why, I said, Rachel and I could use the extra money. Kids are getting expensive. Which was true, which was such a small, respectable, true thing to say, and which had absolutely nothing to do with why I was actually doing it. I was doing it because I had already started, somewhere under the floorboards of my own brain, to think about Diana at night, and I was terrified of what was going to be in my head if I had a whole Saturday with nothing to do but be near her 4 houses down. I needed the overtime the way my father had needed his brown recliner. I needed somewhere to sit that was not in the same room as the thing I was feeling. It worked for about 2 weeks. Then Diana started finding reasons. This is the part one I have to be careful about, because I am not going to make her the villain of this story. She was not the villain. She was a woman drowning in her own quiet just as badly as I was drowning in mine. And when two people are drowning, they do not save each other. They pull each other under, and I knew that the whole time, and I reached for her anyway. But I want you to understand what she started doing, because it is part of how a thing like this actually happens, and because it was the next step down the staircase, and I need you to see me take it. First, it was a coffee. Rachel had left a travel mug at Diana's house after one of the card nights. Nothing. A $12 travel mug with a chip on the rim. Diana walked it over on a Tuesday afternoon while Rachel was at work. I know she knew Rachel was at work, because Rachel's schedule was on the family calendar on the fridge, and Diana had been in our kitchen enough times to have memorized that calendar without meaning to. She rang the doorbell at 4:15 in the afternoon. Caleb was at a friend's house down the block. Hannah was at cheerleading. Tyler was at work at the gas station on the corner. I was alone in the house, in my work clothes, eating a sandwich standing up at the kitchen island because I had come home early with a headache. When I opened the front door and saw her standing on my porch, holding Rachel's chip travel mug, the headache disappeared. I thought she might want it back, Diana said. Rachel's at work till 6, I said. Oh, she said. I didn't realize. She was lying. I knew she was lying. She knew I knew she was lying. Neither of us said anything about the lie. I stepped back from the door and I said, "You want a glass of water or something?" And she said, "Yeah, actually, that would be great. It's hot out, even though it was 58 degrees and overcast," and she walked past me into my house. She stayed for 40 minutes. We sat opposite ends of my own kitchen table, the same table I ate dinner at with my family every night, and we drank 2 glasses of water each, and we talked about nothing. We talked about the weather. We talked about her kids. We talked about a show she had started watching that I had not. Nothing either of us said out loud would have gotten either of us in trouble if Rachel had walked in the door right then. The trouble was everything we did not say out loud. The trouble was the way she kept pushing her hair behind her ear, even though it was not in her face. The trouble was the way I kept finding reasons to get up and walk past her chair, to refill a glass, to get a napkin, to put away a dish, just so I could feel the air move between us. The trouble was that after 40 minutes, when she finally stood up to go, she paused at my front door with her hand on the knob, and she said, very quietly, not looking at me, "Mark, we probably shouldn't do this again." And I said, "Do what?" And she said, "You know what?" And she opened the door and walked out without looking back. And I stood in my own front hallway with my heart beating in my ears, and I understood, for the first time, that she had been fighting this too. That she had been lying in her own dark on her own side of her own bed, trying not to think about me the same way I had been trying not to think about her. The question that opened in me that afternoon, the question I carried around like a hot stone in my pocket for the next 2 weeks, was this: if we were both already fighting it, and we were both already losing, how much longer could it possibly last before one of us stopped fighting? The answer turned out to be 11 days. 11 days after the travel mug, I was backing out my own driveway on a Saturday morning to go to my overtime shift, and Diana came jogging up the sidewalk in leggings and a sweatshirt, like she was out for a run, and she stopped at the end of my driveway and waved at me to roll my window down. I rolled it down. She leaned her hands on the sill of the driver's side door, and her face was close to mine, closer than it had ever been, and she was out of breath, and her cheeks were pink from the cold, and she said very quickly, like she had been rehearsing it the whole way up the block, "Joel and the kids are going to his mother's in Columbus today for the whole day. They already left. I told him I had a migraine, so I could stay home. I don't have a migraine, Mark. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" I understood what she was telling me. I want you to know what I did next, because this is a step I cannot take back. The step where I stopped being a man who could still turn around on the staircase. I looked at her leaning into my truck window on a Saturday morning with the whole neighborhood around us, anyone whom could have been looking out a kitchen window, and I opened my mouth to say no. I swear to you, I opened my mouth to say no. What came out instead was, "I'll call off work. Give me 20 minutes. Not your house. Not mine. Meet me at the trailhead of the Miller Creek Park, the one past the overpass. Nobody goes out there this time of year." And her face did something then that I am going to remember on my deathbed. Her face did not light up. Her face did not smile. Her face crumpled just a little around the eyes, like I had given her bad news instead of good news, and she nodded once and said, "Okay, 20 minutes. And she pushed off my truck and jogged back down the sidewalk the way she had come. I drove half a mile, pulled into a church parking lot, and called my boss and told him Caleb had the flu and I could not come in. I lied about my 11-year-old son having the flu so I could go meet my brother-in-law's wife at a trailhead. I am never going to get over that. I am not asking you to forgive me for it. I am telling you because I need you to understand that by the time I pulled into the Miller Creek lot and saw her little silver Corolla parked under a bare sycamore tree, I had already traded something inside myself I was never going to get back, and I was not even the one who had brought it up. We did not do anything that morning. I want that on the record, not because it makes me any less guilty, but because it is true and because the truth is the only thing I have left to give the story. We walked down a muddy path along a creek that was running high and brown from the spring rains, and we did not touch each other, and we did not kiss. And for almost an hour, we did not even say anything that could not have been said in front of our spouses. We talked about our fathers, hers who left, mine who sat in the recliner. We talked about our mothers, hers who worked 3 jobs and got bitter, mine who dropped dead on the kitchen floor and never got the chance to. We talked about the feeling of having made every right decision in your life and still ending up in a place you did not recognize. And halfway through that sentence, her voice broke, and she stopped walking in the middle of the trail, and she put her face in her hands, and she cried. Not loud, not pretty, the way grown women cry when they've been holding something in for too long, shoulders hunched, silent, like they are trying not to wake a baby. I did not know what to do. I want to tell you, I had a plan. I did not have a plan. I reached out with one hand, and I put on her shoulder, the way you put your hand on the shoulder of anybody who is crying in front of you. And the second my palm touched her sweatshirt, she turned and stepped into me and put her face against the front of my jacket and wrapped her arms around my middle and just held on. I held her. God forgive me, I held her. Out there on a muddy trail under a sycamore tree 4 miles from my own house, with my wife at work thinking her husband was lifting pallets in a warehouse, and my son at home thinking his dad was earning overtime for his birthday present. I stood there in the cold and held another woman while she cried into my jacket. And I did not kiss her, and I did not even say anything, but I was already done. I already knew. I knew the way you know the first time you taste something sweet as a kid that you are going to want more of it for the rest of your life. I knew the way you know when a cut on your hand is going to scar. When she finally pulled back, she did not look at me. She wiped her face on the sleeve of her sweatshirt, and she said, "I don't want to go home." And I said, "I know." And she said, "I have to go home." And I said, "I know." And we walked back to the parking lot, and I opened her car door for her like a gentleman, like a man who had not just held somebody else's wife against his chest for 2 minutes. And she got in without looking at me. And she started the engine, and she rolled down the window, and she said, "Mark, I need you to say out loud that this is not going to happen again. I need you to say it, and I need you to mean it." And I looked her in the eye across the open window of her little silver Corolla on a Saturday morning in March, and I said, "This is not going to happen again." And I meant it. I want that on the record too. In that moment, with the cold air on my face and my breath coming out in clouds, I meant it. I was lying, and I meant it. Both things were true at the same time. That is the part in the affair that nobody who has not been in one can understand. That night, I went home. I walked to my own front door to the smell of Rachel's pot roast in the slow cooker, and Caleb came flying down the stairs yelling, "Dad, you're home early," and launched himself at me. And I caught him into the arms and swung him around one time, the way I had done every day since he could walk, and I held him too tight and for too long. I put my face down into the top of his head, his hair, that still smelled like the baby shampoo Rachel kept buying, because he refused to switch to the grown-up kind. And I closed my eyes and I thought, I am going to protect you from this. I am going to eat this alive inside my own chest, and you are never going to know. I made that promise to my 11-year-old son with my face in his hair in the front hallway of our house, and I believed I could keep it. I believed the morning on the trail had been the end of something and not the beginning of something. I believed I had been to the edge of the cliff and stepped back in time. I walked into the kitchen. Rachel was at the stove, stirring something in a pan. She did not turn around when I came in. She said, over her shoulder, very casually, "Hey, your brother-in-law called. Joel called. He said you called off work today. and my stomach went cold all at once, the way your stomach goes cold when a police car pulls up behind you on an empty road. He said he tried to call you to see if you want to come get lunch with him. He had to come back early from Columbus because Jacob got sick in car. He said your phone went straight to voicemail. He said when he drove past the house, your truck was gone. He wanted to know where you were. She still had not turned around. She was still stirring the pan. Her voice was completely normal. And I stood there in the doorway of my own kitchen in my jacket with the mud of the Miller Creek Trail still on my boots. And I opened my mouth to answer my wife. And for the first time in a whole 18 years, I had known her. I did not know what was going to come out, because I realized with a kind of slow horror that started at the back of my neck and went all the way down the heels of my feet, that Joel had been looking for me. Joel, who never called me in the middle of the day. Joel, who was an hour and a half away in Columbus at 8 o'clock that morning. Joel, who had told his wife he was taking the kids to his mother's for the whole day. Joel had come back early. Joel had called me, and when I did not answer, Joel had driven past my house. And when my truck was not there, Joel had called my wife. And the question that opened up in me, right there in my own kitchen doorway with my wife's back to me and my son's cartoons playing in the next room, was not, how am I going to explain where I was? The question was, why was Joel looking for me in the first place? Because Joel did not call people in the middle of the day. Joel did not drive past people's houses. Joel did not call his sister at the dental clinic to ask where her husband was. Joel did exactly one thing when something was bothering him, which was sit on his front porch with a beer and wait for it to stop bothering him. For Joel to have picked up a phone twice and driven across town once on a Saturday morning when he was supposed to be in Columbus, something had to be very, very wrong in Joel's head already. And I understood, standing there, that Joel knew something. Not everything. Not the trailhead. Not the creek. Not his wife crying into the front of my jacket. But something, a look of his own. A wrong answer to a small question. A travel mug that had not come back to our house the way he would have expected it to. A migraine on a Saturday that had conveniently happened on a day he was supposed to be gone. Rachel turned around from the stove. She was holding the wooden spoon in one hand and wiping the other on her apron, and her face was still normal, still the face of the wife of a man she trusted. And she looked at me across our kitchen, and she said, in the exact same casual voice, "So, where were you, honey?" And somewhere 4 houses down the street, sitting on his own front porch in the March cold with beer in his hand and his 6th son on the couch inside, my brother-in-law Joel was waiting for the same answer. I lied. Of course I lied. What else was I going to do? Standing in my own kitchen with mud on my boots and another woman's tears still drying into the front of my jacket. I told Rachel I had gone out to the reservoir to clear my head. I said I had been having a rough week at work. I said I'd turn my phone off because I just needed an hour to sit in my truck and not be reachable. She looked at me for a long time, longer than she usually looked at me, and I could see her doing math in her head, the way a wife does math when something does not quite add up, but she is not ready to see the total. Then she said, "Okay," but called Joel back. He sounded worried, and she turned back to the stove. I called Joel from the back porch. I lit a cigarette I did not want, and I dialed his number, and I listened to 3 rings that felt like 3 years. And when he picked up, his voice was normal, completely normal. He said, "Hey, man, I tried to get you earlier. Jacob puked in the car. So we turned around, thought we could grab a burger." I said, "Sorry, I was out at the reservoir, needed some air." He said, "No worries. You all right?" I said, "Yeah, just stressed." He said, "I hear you. Come over later if you want. I got that IPA you like." And he hung up. No suspicion in his voice. No edge. Nothing. Just Joel being Joel. A man offering another man a beer, because that is what Joel knew how to do. I stood there on the back porch, and I smoked my cigarette, and I thought, maybe I was wrong. Maybe Joel had not been looking for me. Maybe Joel had just been a bored man with a sick kid who wanted company. Maybe the whole thing in the kitchen doorway, the cold stomach, the paranoia, the absolute certainty that the walls were closing in had all been in my head. I finished the cigarette. I went inside. I played a board game with Caleb after dinner, and I let him win. Rachel fell asleep on the couch watching a cooking show. I carried a blanket out and covered her and stood there for a minute looking down at her face. And her face in sleep looked the way it had looked when we were 22, before the kids, before the mortgage, before I became a man who needed to lie about where his truck had been on a Saturday morning. I went upstairs and I got in bed and I told myself it was over, really over this time. Not the kind of over I had told myself before, the kind with a loophole, the kind with a door left open. Real over, done, finished. I would see Diana at the Friday card game and I would be polite and I would be distant and I would never, ever touch her again. And the thing in my chest would die the way all things die when you stop feeding them. I said this to myself in the dark, and I believed it. I want you to understand that I believed it every single time I said it. That is the cruelest part of being weak. It is not that you lie to yourself. It is that you mean it every time. I kept that promise for 9 days. On the 10th day, Diana texted me 3 words: I miss you, and the whole careful architecture of my resolve. 9 days of not looking at her. 9 days of not driving past her house on the way home from work. 9 days of being a husband I was supposed to be, collapsed like a house of cards in a draft. I wrote back in 11 seconds. I counted later. 11 seconds. That is how long my willpower lasted against 3 words from a woman who was not my wife. I need to skip ahead now, because the weeks between that text and the night everything ended are weeks I have already told you about. The stolen coffees, the walks, the long conversations in my truck on county roads. The afternoon she cried on the trail. The night I could not sleep because her chair at the card table was empty. You know those weeks. You know who I was during those weeks. What you do not know yet is the night I came home from a motel. I have told you that there was a motel. I have told you it was off-white siding and a flickering vacancy sign, and a front desk clerk who did not look up from his phone. I have told you I am not going to describe the room, because the room is mine, and I am keeping it. But I have not told you what happened when I got home from that room, and that is the part of this story I have been circling around for a long time now, the way you circle around a drain before you go down it. It was a Thursday. I remember it was a Thursday because Rachel had her late shift on Thursdays, which meant she did not get home until 8, which meant I had the house to myself from 5:15 until 8, which meant I had time to shower, to change, to put the clothes I had been wearing into the washing machine, to stand in front of the bathroom mirror and look at myself and try to recognize the person looking back. I did all those things. I stood in the bathroom with a towel around my waist, and I looked in the mirror, and I tried to find a man who had stood in a trailer doorway at 16 and sworn he would never let anybody down, and I could not find him. He was not there. There was just a 40-year-old man with wet hair and red eyes and a hickey on the side of his neck that he was going to have to explain if he did not cover it with a collared shirt. I put on the collared shirt. I went downstairs. I started dinner. Spaghetti, the kind from a box, the kind Rachel liked because I always put too much garlic in the sauce, and she would tease me about it. Caleb was at the kitchen table doing homework. Hannah was upstairs with her headphones on. Tyler was out somewhere, probably with his girlfriend, probably doing whatever 18-year-olds did on a Thursday night. The house was quiet. The water was boiling. I was standing at the stove with a wooden spoon in my hand, watching the bubbles, and I felt so far away from the surface of my own life that I could have been watching it from another room. Rachel came home at 8:12. I know the exact time because I was watching the clock, the way a man watches a clock when he is waiting for his sentencing. She came to the side door into the kitchen the way she always did, keys in one hand, purse over one shoulder, and she stopped. She stopped in the doorway. She did not come in. She just stood there with her keys in her hand, and she looked at me, and something in her face was different from any face she had ever made at me in 18 years. "Sit down, Mark," she said. "I want to tell you that I played it cool. I want to tell you that I said, 'What's up, honey?' and kept stirring the sauce. I did not. My hand stopped moving on the spoon, and my whole body went still, the way a rabbit goes still when it hears a dog. And I turned around, and I looked at my wife, and I knew, before she opened her mouth again, that the floor was about to go out from under me. 'Sit down,' she said again. Her voice was not angry. That was the worst part. Her voice was flat, ironed out, like she had already done all her screaming in the car on the way home, and there was nothing left. I sat down. I sat down at the kitchen table across from my 11-year-old son, who was looking back and forth between his parents with a pencil in his hand and his math worksheet half finished. And Rachel looked at Caleb and said, in a voice I barely recognized, "Baby, go upstairs. Right now. Close your door." Caleb opened his mouth to argue, and something in his mother's face shut it for him. He picked up his worksheet and his pencil, and he walked out of the kitchen without saying a word. I listened to his footsteps go up the stairs. I listened to his door close. And then there was silence in my kitchen. Just the spaghetti water boiling over onto the burner would hiss, and Rachel still standing in the doorway with her keys and her purse and that face. She reached into her purse. She pulled out her phone. She set it face up on the kitchen table and slid it across to me the way you slide a card across a poker table when you know you have the winning hand. On the screen was a text conversation. Not hers, Diana's. Screenshots, 6 of them. My name at the top of every single one. I looked at the first screenshot. It was a text I had sent Diana 3 weeks earlier, the one after the motel, the one where I had written, "I cannot stop thinking about you. I am losing my mind. When can I see you again?" I looked at the second screenshot. It was Diana's reply. "Tomorrow, same place. Please be careful." I looked at the third, the fourth, the fifth. I watched my entire secret life laid out on my wife's phone screen in little blue and gray bubbles, one after another, text after text, each one worse than the last, each one a nail in a coffin I had built with my own hands. I looked up at Rachel. "Joel found them," she said. 2 words. Joel found them. And the whole world I had been balancing on the head of a pin for 4 months tilted sideways and slid off and shattered on the floor of my kitchen. Joel found them on her phone an hour ago. He called me at the clinic. He called me at work, Mark. He called me at the clinic, and he was crying. Joel was crying. Have you ever heard Joel cry? I have known that man for 15 years, and I have never heard him cry. And he called me at work, and he could barely get the words out, and he read me the texts, Mark. He read them to me, out loud, on the phone, while I was standing in the supply closet at the dental clinic with my hand over my mouth, so my patients would not hear me. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. My tongue was made of sand. "Do not," she said. She held up one hand, palm flat, the way you stop traffic. "Do not say a single word right now. Do not say you are sorry. Do not say it did not mean anything. Do not say it is over. Do not say any of the things you are about to say, because I already know what they are, and I cannot hear them right now without breaking something in this kitchen, and our son is upstairs." The spaghetti water boiled over again. The hiss filled the room. Neither of us moved to turn it off. "How long?" she said. I looked at the table. "How long, Mark?" "For months," I said. My voice did not sound like my voice. It sounded like a recording of my voice played back on a bad speaker. She made a sound, not a word, a sound. The kind of sound you make when you've been punched in a place you did not know you could be punched. She put both hands on the edge of the kitchen counter behind her, and she gripped it, and I watched her knuckles go white, and I understood that the counter was the only thing keeping her standing. "For months," she repeated. "For months you have been sleeping next to me. For months you have been eating my food. For months you have been kissing me goodnight. For months you have been looking me in the face every single morning and lying. For months, Mark, 120 days. Do you know how many times I packed your lunch in the last 4 months? Do you know how many times I wrote your name on a paper bag? Do you know how many mornings I kissed you at the door and said, 'Have a good day, honey,' while you were on your way to her?" I did not count them. She had. She had counted them in the car on the way home. That is the kind of math a woman does when her husband breaks her heart. She does not calculate the damage in abstractions. She calculates it in paper bags. "And Diana," Rachel said, "Diana, my brother's wife, my friend, the woman I sat next to at Thanksgiving, the woman whose kids play with my kids, the woman I taught my grandmother's pie crust recipe to because she asked me so sweetly and I thought she was so kind. That Diana, that woman, that is who you chose." I tried to say something. I do not know what I was going to say. It did not matter. Rachel was not asking me questions. Rachel was reading me a verdict. "Joel wants to come over here," she said. "Joel wants to come over here right now. He is sitting on his front porch 4 houses down, and he wants to walk down here and look you in the face. I told him to wait. I told him to give me an hour. I told him I needed to hear it from you first. So here I am. Here I am, Mark. I drove home from work, and I sat in the driveway for 15 minutes because I could not make my legs work. And then I came inside, and here I am. And you are going to tell me everything. Right now, from the beginning. And if you lie to me one more time, even once, even a little, I'm going to take our children, and I am going to drive to my mother's house, and you are never going to see me again. So I told her. I told her everything. I told her about the can of Coke on moving day. I told her about the wrist across the back of my hand at the card table. I told her about the travel mug. I told her about the Saturday at the reservoir that was not the reservoir. I told her about the trail and the crying and the holding. I told her about the text. I told her about the motel. I told her about the room I said I would never describe, and I described it, every detail. The water stain on the ceiling, and the bedspread that smelled like bleach and the sound of the highway through the thin walls. I told my wife things about another woman's body that no wife should ever have to hear, and I watched her face as I said them, and her face did not move. Her face had gone somewhere else. Her face had left the room and sent a mask in its place, and the mask listened to everything I said with its eyes open, and its mouth closed, and its hands still gripping the counter. When I was done, the kitchen was very quiet. The spaghetti water had boiled dry. The pot was scorched. The smell of burnt metal hung in the air like a small, ugly monument to the evening I had just destroyed. Rachel let go of the counter. She walked past me without looking at me. She went to the stove and she turned off the burner, and she picked up the scorched pot and she set it in the sink, and she turned on the cold water, and the steam rose up around her face like smoke, and she stood there with her back to me, and she said very quietly, almost to herself, I knew, somewhere in me, I knew, and I did not let myself know. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. I kept telling myself you were tired, you were stressed, you were going through something at work. I kept making excuses for you inside my own head. Mark, I kept defending you to myself. Do you understand what that means? I was your lawyer. In the court of my own mind, I was your lawyer. And the whole time you were guilty. She turned off the water. She turned around. Her eyes were dry. I wish they were not dry. I wish she was crying. Because crying would have meant there was still something in her that was soft enough to break. And I could have held that. I could have knelt on the floor of my own kitchen and held my wife while she cried, and at least been doing something. But she was not crying. She was looking at me with the same flat, ironed-out expression she had walked in with, and I understood that the cry had already happened. In the supply closet at the dental clinic, on the phone with Joel, in the car in the driveway. The crying was over. What was left was something harder than crying. What was left was a woman deciding, in real time, whether the man in front of her was worth another 18 years, or whether she was going to walk out the side door and never come back. Then the front door opened. I heard it before I saw it. The screen door, then the heavy door behind it, then boots on the hardwood of the hallway. And then Joel was standing in the kitchen doorway, where Rachel had been standing 5 minutes earlier, and his face was nothing like Rachel's face. Rachel's face had been flat. Joel's face was on fire. Joel's face was the face of a man who had been sitting on his front porch for 45 minutes trying to give his sister time, and had run out of patience, and run out of porch, and had walked 4 houses down the street with his hands and fists at his sides. Rachel, he said, I'm sorry. I couldn't wait. Rachel closed her eyes. She did not tell him to leave. She stepped to the side, out of the space between Joel and me, the way a person steps out of the road when they see a truck coming. Joel looked at me. I want to describe the look he gave me, and I cannot. I have spent years trying to find the right words for it, and there are no right words. It was not anger, although there was anger in it. It was not hatred, although there was hatred in it. It was the look of a man who has just discovered that the floor of his house has been rotten the whole time he's been walking on it, and he is staring at the hole he just fell through, and the hole has my face. Was it worth it? He said. I did not answer. I said, was it worth it, Mark? Was my wife worth it? Were the 4 months worth it? Was the motel worth it? Was the sneaking around, the lying to my face, the sitting at my kitchen table eating my food, and drinking my beer and laughing at my jokes while you were sleeping with my wife, was all of that worth it? Joel, Rachel said. Just his name. A warning. No, he said. No, Rachel, I am sorry, but no. I sat on my porch. I gave you your time. Now I need mine. He took a step toward me. Not a big step. One step. But the kitchen was small, and one step from Joel put him close enough that I could smell the beer on his breath and see the vein in his temple that I had never noticed before. I want to hear him say it. I want to hear him tell me to my face. Was she worth it? Was she worth my marriage and your marriage and my kids and your kids and everything we built on this street? Was she worth all of that, Mark? Because I need to know. I need to know if the man I let into my house and called my brother for 10 years thought so little of me that my wife was just something he could take when he got bored of his own. I looked at Joel. I looked at the man I had betrayed, the man who had handed me beers on his porch and helped me move a dresser and driven my kid to soccer practice when I had to work late, the man who had trusted me with his home, his table, his family, the inside of his life. I looked at him and I opened my mouth. And I said the only true thing I had left. No, I said, it was not worth it. Nothing is worth this. Joel's face did something I will never forget. It crumpled. Not the way Diana's face had crumpled at my truck window that Saturday morning. A different kind of crumple. The kind where a grown man's jaw starts to shake and his eyes fill up and he bites down on his own lip. So hard you can see the dent. Because he will not cry. He will not cry in front of the man who did this to him. He will die before he cries in front of me. He stood there in my kitchen and he fought his own face for about 5 seconds, and he won barely, and then he pointed one finger at me, one thick construction callus finger, and he held it about 6 inches from my chest, and he said, in a voice that was shaking so badly the words came out in pieces, "You stay away from her. You stay away from my wife. You stay away from my kids. You stay away from my house. If I see your truck on my block, I will put you through the windshield. Do you hear me? Do you hear me, Mark?" I heard him. He turned around. He walked out of my kitchen. He walked out of my hallway. He walked out my front door, and he let it slam behind him. And I heard his boots on the front walk and then on the sidewalk, getting quieter, heading back up the street for houses, back to his own porch, back to his own life, back to a wife who was probably sitting on the edge of their bathtub, right now waiting to find out what was left. Rachel, and I stood in the kitchen alone. The scorched pot was still in the sink. The burner was still off. Upstairs, behind a closed door, my 11-year-old son was sitting on his bed with a pencil and a half-finished math worksheet, and he had heard every word. I knew he had heard every word because the house was small and Joel's voice had not been quiet, and sound travels up through old houses the way water travels down. And my son, my Caleb, who still ran out to meet my truck in the driveway, had just heard a man he called Uncle Joel tell his father that he would put him through a windshield. Rachel picked up her phone from the table. She looked at the screenshots one more time. Then she closed the screen and put the phone in her pocket, and she looked at me. And for the first time since she had walked in the door, I saw something behind the mask. It was not anger. It was not sadness. It was exhaustion. The bone-deep, ancient exhaustion of a woman who has just realized she was going to have to decide the rest of her life tonight, in a kitchen that smells like burnt metal, while her children sleep upstairs. "I am going to bed," she said. "I am going to sleep in Hannah's room tonight. Tomorrow we are going to figure out what happens next. Do not come upstairs. Do not knock on the door. Do not text me. Do not do anything except sit here and think about what you have done to this family." She walked past me. She went upstairs. I heard Hannah's door open and close. And then the house was quiet. The kind of quiet that is not peaceful. The kind of quiet that is just the sound of everything that used to be alive in a room lying very still on the floor. I sat at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning. I did not move. I did not eat. I did not turn on a light. I just sat there in the dark with my hands flat on the table where the cards used to be, and I stared at the empty chair across from me, Diana's chair, the chair where she used to sit on Friday nights and look at me over the top of her cards. And I understood that nobody was ever going to sit in that chair again. Not her. Not anybody. The chair was empty, and the table was empty, and the kitchen was empty. And I was the one who had emptied it. And there was no card game in the world that could fill it back up. At some point I heard a sound behind me. A small sound. A creak on the stairs. I turned around and Caleb was standing in the kitchen doorway in his pajamas, holding his math worksheet in one hand, and his face in the dark hallway was the face of a boy who has heard something he cannot unhear and does not have the word to ask about it. He stood there and he looked at me and he said in a voice so small it barely made it across the room, "Dad, is Uncle Joel mad at you?" I looked at my son, my youngest, my baby, the boy who still ran out to meet my truck, the boy whose hair still smelled like the shampoo he would not give up, the boy I had used as an alibi, whose fake flu I had reported to my boss so I could go meet his uncle's wife at a trailhead. I looked at him standing there in the dark with his homework in his hand and his whole world tilting under his feet, and I felt something inside my chest collapse, not break, not crack, collapse. The way a building collapses when a last support beam gives out and there is nothing left to hold the weight. "No, buddy," I said, "Uncle Joel is not mad at me. We just had a disagreement. Grown-up stuff. Nothing for you to worry about." One more lie. One more lie to the one person in the world who still believed every word I said. One more paper bag with my name on it, handed to a boy who trusted the man who packed it. Caleb stood there for a few more seconds, and then he nodded, the way kids nod when they do not believe you but decide to let you have it anyway. And he turned and went back upstairs, and I heard his door close, and I put my head down on the kitchen table, on the wood where the nickels and dimes used to be, and I cried. I cried the way I had not cried since my mother died on the kitchen floor of a trailer 40 minutes from here. I cried for my wife upstairs in my daughter's bed. I cried for Joel on his porch with his fists. I cried for Diana in a bathtub, somewhere I was never going to see again. I cried for Caleb, who deserved a father who did not need to be forgiven. And I cried for myself, which I know I did not have a right to do. And I did it anyway, because there was nobody left in the room to stop me. Rachel did not leave me. That is the first thing you need to know, because it is a thing that nobody who hears this story ever guesses right. They always guess she left. They always guess the suitcase by the door, the lawyer's letter, the divorce. That is not what happened. What happened was worse, and I am going to tell you why. She came downstairs at 6 a.m. I was still at the kitchen table. I had not moved. The sky outside the window over the sink had gone from black to gray to that thin, washed out blue. That means the day is going to happen whether you are ready for it or not. She was in the same clothes she had worn home from work. She had not slept either. She sat down across from me in Diana's chair, and she put her hands flat on the table the way I had been doing for 4 hours. And she looked at me and she said, "I am not going to leave you, Mark. I want you to know that right now, before I say anything else. I am not going to leave you, and I want you to understand that the reason I am not leaving you is not because I forgive you. I do not forgive you. I do not know if I am ever going to forgive you. The reason I am not leaving you is because I have 3 children upstairs, and I am not going to let what you did to me become what happens to them. I am not going to be the woman who blew up her own kids' lives because their father could not keep his hands to himself. So you're going to stay, and I'm going to stay. And we are going to walk around inside this marriage like 2 people walking around inside a house after a fire. And we're going to step over burned places. And we are going to pretend in front of the children that the house is still standing. And someday, maybe, if we are very lucky and very careful, some of the rooms might get rebuilt. But some of them are not going to. Some of them are gone, Mark. And I need you to know which ones, so you do not waste the rest of your life trying to walk back into them." She told me which rooms. She told me, in a voice that never went above the volume of a normal conversation, which parts of her I had killed. She told me she was never going to trust me again. Not all the way. Not the way she had trusted me on the morning. She packed my lunch in a paper bag with my name on it. She told me she was never going to look at me in a doorway and feel safe the way she used to feel safe. She told me she was going to flinch, sometimes for the rest of her life, when my phone buzzed at the wrong time of night, and that the flinch was my fault and I was going to have to live with watching it happen and never being allowed to comfort her about it, because the thing she was flinching from was me. She told me she was going to keep her wedding ring on her finger and her last name on her mail and her body in our bed, but that some part of her, the soft part, the part that had reached for me in the dark for 18 years, that part was packing a small bag right now inside her chest, and that part was leaving, and I was never going to see it again, and I was not allowed to ask where it had gone. I sat there and I took it. I took every word. I did not defend myself. I did not explain. I did not say I was sorry, because she had told me the night before not to say I was sorry, and the only thing I had left to give her was obedience. When she was done, she stood up, she walked to the coffee maker, she made a pot of coffee. She poured 2 mugs. She set one in front of me. She did not look at me when she set it down. She just set it down, the way you set a bowl of food down for a dog you're still mad at, but cannot bring yourself to let go hungry. And I understood, watching the steam come up off that coffee mug, that this was the rest of my life. Coffee set down in front of me by a woman who would not look at me for as many mornings as I had left. Joel never spoke to me again. Not once. Not at Thanksgiving. Not at Christmas. Not at his own son Lucas's first birthday party, where I stood at the edge of the backyard and watched a 1-year-old in a paper crown smear cake on his own face. And Joel stood 12 feet away from me with a beer in his hand and looked through me like I was a window. He did not tell anybody. That is the part one did not see coming. I had assumed Joel would burn me down. I had assumed there would be a phone call to my mother-in-law, a Facebook post, a scene at a holiday, something. There was nothing. Joel went home that night from my kitchen, and he sat down with Diana, and they made a decision together, the two of them, that they were going to keep the baby and keep the marriage and keep the secret. Because Diana was already showing by then, and Joel had already told his whole family she was pregnant, and Joel would not let his son grow up as the punchline of a story about his mother. So Joel swallowed it. He swallowed the whole thing, and it ate him from inside the way it ate me. And the only revenge he ever took on me was a silence. And the silence was enough. The silence was a knife he stuck in me at every family dinner for the next 15 years, and never once pulled out. Diana had the baby in July. A boy. They named him Lucas. I have already told you about Lucas. I have told you about the gap between his front teeth, and the way he tilts his head, and the hairline that might be mine and might not. What I have not told you is the moment, 6 weeks after Lucas was born, when Diana brought him to a family cookout in a little blue carrier and set the carrier down on the picnic table and went inside to help Rachel with the potato salad. And I was alone in the backyard with a sleeping baby for about 90 seconds. Just me and him. Nobody watching. And I leaned over the carrier and I looked down into his face and I whispered, so quiet that only God and the baby could hear me, "If you are mine, I am sorry. I am so sorry. I am going to love you from across this yard for the rest of my life, and you are never going to know why. And that is the price I am paying, not you. You did not do anything. I did. I am sorry, buddy. I am so sorry." And the baby opened his eyes for 1 second and looked up at me, the way babies do, not really seeing, just orienting toward a voice. And then he closed them again and went back to sleep. And Diana came back out of the house with a bowl in her hands, and she saw me leaning over the carrier, and her whole body went stiff for 1 second in the kitchen doorway. And then she walked over and picked the carrier up without looking at me, and carried her son to the other side of the yard, and sat down with her back to me, and that was my answer. That was the only answer I was ever going to get. Her back, for the rest of my life. Her back across the yard. So here is the ending. Here are the 3 layers. The way you asked me to say them, except I did not know that was what I was doing when I started telling you this. I just knew there were 3 things I had to tell you before I could stop talking. The first layer is the marriage. Rachel and I are still married. We will be married until one of us dies. We sleep in the same bed. We eat at the same table. We raised 3 children to adulthood inside the burn house she described to me at 6 a.m. the day after Joel walked into my kitchen. And we did it well, and the kids never knew. And on the outside, we look like any other couple who made it. Tyler is married now with a baby of his own. Hannah is in nursing school. Caleb is 15 and almost as tall as me and still, on a good day, runs out to meet my truck. The marriage is real. The love is real, in the only way it is allowed to be real now, which is a careful kind, the kind that walks around the burned places. Some nights I reach for my wife in the dark, and she lets me. Some nights she does not. I never ask why on the nights she does not. I already know. The second layer is Joel. Joel is still 4 houses down. We still see each other every week. He still does not speak to me. 15 years of silence. 15 years of looking through me like I am a window. 15 years of his wife passing me a serving dish across the table without our fingers touching. 15 years of watching a man I betrayed carry the betrayal in his body. The way his shoulders sit a little lower than they used to. The way he drinks a little more than he used to. The way he laughs at his own 3 jokes a little quieter than he used to. I did that to him. Not the affair. The carrying. I gave him a thing to carry for the rest of his life, and he carries it without ever once setting it down where anybody can see it. And the dignity of that, the awful, unbearable dignity of that, is a punishment I deserve and will never finish serving. The third layer is Lucas. Lucas is almost 4 now. He is a bright, funny little kid with a gap between his front teeth and a way of tilting his head when he is about to laugh. Last Sunday at a family barbecue, he ran across the backyard chasing a butterfly, and he tripped over a sprinkler head and went down hard on his hands and knees, and he sat up in the grass with his palms scraped and his lower lip pushed out, and he looked around the yard for somebody to come help him, and his eyes found Joel first, the way they were supposed to. Joel went to him. Joel scooped him up under the arms and dusted off his knees and kissed the top of his head and called him buddy, and Lucas wrapped his arms around Joel's neck and put his face in Joel's shoulder, and that is the way it should be, and that is the way it is, and that is the way it is going to stay until one of us is in the ground. But for 1 second before Joel got to him, while Lucas was still sitting in the grass looking around for help, his eyes passed over me. They passed over me, and they did not stop. They did not know to stop. And in that 1 second, in the half a heartbeat where a 4-year-old boy looked at me, without recognizing anything, I understood the whole shape of what I had done to my own life. I had traded the right to be looked at by my own son, if he was my son, for a smile across a kitchen table from a woman I was never going to be allowed to love out loud. That was the trade. That was the whole price. And I had paid it before I even knew there was a register. I do not get to confess. I do not get to be forgiven. I do not get to find out. I get to make the coffee in the morning, and I get to kiss my wife on the top of her head where her hair is starting to go gray, and I get to drive to work, and I get to come home, and I get to play cards on Friday nights with a man who has not spoken to me in 15 years, and his wife, who used to be the love of my life, and a little boy who tilts his head like I do, and I get to call all of my life. And on the good days, I almost believe it. That is the story. That is all of it. If you are out there right now and you are 40 years old and you are tired and somebody just looked at you a half second too long across a kitchen table and you felt a warm coin drop into your chest, I am not going to tell you what to do. I am not in any position to tell anybody what to do. I am only going to tell you what I wish somebody had told me on a Saturday morning in April with a cold can of Coke in my hand. The door is still latched. Walk away from it. You have no idea what is on the other side.
What would you do in this situation? Be honest, or did this remind you of someone? Tell me in the comments. And if this made you think about your own relationship, I left something in the description that can help you build something stronger. Subscribe if you want more stories like this every day, and share this with someone who needs to hear this story.